Let's now have a conversation about trials, and this is medical trials.
Okay. I was going to say trials and tribulations.
Don't get biblical on us into this one.
National Olympic
Yeah,
trials,
absolutely.
No, none of those.
Political trials.
Or courtroom trials.
Corruption.
trials,
Sir.
medical trials.
Thank you.
Okay, and we know this in medical research. We hear it all the time. So, researchers working on some certain treatment or so, they've reached now a certain level of trials. They've moved into animal trials, and they've gone into human trials, and they've now been allowed to all those things. Protecting the rights and welfare of human participants in research is the conversation we want to have, and we are joined by Ambrose Rachier. He is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, among very many other things, which includes being the chairperson of the Kenya Medical Research Institute's Scientific and Review Unit. It's an institutional scientific and ethics review committee. Very good morning, Ambrose.
Good morning.
Good to have you in the situation room on the hot seat. Karibu sana, make yourself comfortable.
I am very, very, very comfortable.
Very good.
I can assure you about that.
Very good. It's good to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm also pleased to be here. Thank you.
Ambrose Rachier is someone who has chewed a book.
Plenty of it.
He's chewed a lot of book
And has lived life.
and has lived his life and is still doing so. Ambrose is a lawyer. He has studied law. He has also studied French. He has a master's degree in translation of English, French, French, English. You'll tell us.
That is so.
How? Okay. Why? And when?
Good. Let me. That's about French.
Yes.
Yes, I started French in Form 1 in 1965. It was many years ago.
Do it like
And then I studied French after completing my A-levels. I took French, something called Certificat Pratique de Langue Française à l'Université de Madagascar.
Oui.
Yes, that was 1971. And then decided again to go and do law. And after finishing my law and also doing law at a master's level, I decided to go back to the Nairobi University to study the language that I loved so much. And so I did 2012, I did Master of Arts in Translation and specializing in English, French, French, English.
Why?
I love languages. I have three kind of very interesting and apparently conflicting interests. My first one is languages. My second one is medicine. And my third one is law.
So your first interest is actually language.
It's languages. I love languages, learning languages, and it comes to me fairly naturally. I did German, but I lost it. I've also done Kiswahili. I've also done...
You haven't lost it.
Yeah, so I have a lot of interest in just languages when I get to hear them. Yeah, my second one at A-level was just a conflict as to whether I should take medicine or take law. And I opted to take law and to pursue medical issues later on. And that's why after doing law and teaching law, I then decided to go for something called a master's in bioethics. And this is in the field of research. And to serve in KEMRI, I have served in KEMRI for 42 years as a member of the Research Ethics Committee, but became its chair just about 15 years ago.
Take us to 49 years ago when you... Is it 49 or 42? 42 years ago in 1979.
Yes, that was 79.
When you joined this ethics committee
Yes.
at KEMRI.
Right.
How did you end up there? At that point, you were a lawyer.
Yes, I was practicing
And
law.
practicing
I
law.
actually practiced law for 4 years. I started practicing law in 1975. By 79, I decided to take part in matters of research. This is in pursuit of my interests that I had said before concerning medicine. And I thought the best way to deal with medicine from a layman's point of view was to go and see how research is done at KEMRI. And at that time, in fact, in the ethics review committees, and I'm in 3 of them in this country, apart from chairing the KEMRI Ethics Committee. I also vice chair the Strathmore University Ethics Committee, and a member also of the Aga Khan University Ethics Committee. So this is something that interested me. So I went in as a lay person. The lay person usually is required as a part of the constitution of an ethics committee. And that is the person who is what they call the common person. How do you feel about this research? If you're asked that, what do you feel if you were to participate as a subject? So the layman is important. In fact, no ethics meeting starts without the presence of a lay person, even as of today. So having joined as a lay person, and with time, I was taken to quite a number of trainings at the institute, attending many lectures, short courses, and eventually got converted to be able myself to look at them from a medical point of view. And it is for that reason that I earned a position as the chair of the ethics committee, having now, in a way, grasped what the ethics of research or medical research involving human participants. We're not just talking about research generally, but research involving human participants. So that's how I found myself in KEMRI and subsequently in other ethics committees. Right.
You know, most people hear of an ethics committee, and just that word ethics takes them to NCIC. Yes, and they think...
Or EACC.
Or EACC, or Chapter 6 of our Constitution. Yes. And they're thinking, okay, now, what is it about research ethics and why is it that it's important?
Yes, thank you. A very, very good question. Research ethics is about health. It's not just only finding about diseases, or causes of diseases, but also testing new treatments, new medicines. I think the best example that we can cite now is COVID. When people started feeling as they felt, everybody was, of course, shocked. And the first thing you want to know is what causes this thing called COVID, and then how do we respond to it? And the only way to do it is to carry out research. And the best way to carry out research involving human beings is, of course, diseases is, first of all, to use human beings. And when you're going to use human beings, the scientists in history were over-enthusiastic and therefore cared little about the rights of those people who were participating. A famous case always cited is something called the Tuskegee scandal that happened in America between 1932 and I dare say up to 1966 when another scientist had the audacity to reveal that something scandalous is happening here, and the study involved just black Americans only, which suggests that there was clear discrimination about the use of those people. And then they were using very underhand means that they were studying syphilis and they were studying penicillin. And then in that kind of study of syphilis and penicillin, you found that it was targeted against the black people, and they were doing something dangerous called the use of a placebo. A placebo means that when you have people participating, there is a group that gets treatment and the group which does not get treatment. The group that does not get treatment may just be allowed to die. And while we know, and in fact, when in the early 40s, penicillin had been known to be effective, still these people were denied the right. They went on being used as placebos. And by 1997, when Bill Clinton was apologizing to them, there were only 8 out of 400 people. So how many people died? So that is the kind of scandal. Just about the same years, about the 40s, in the 40s, again, the Nazi physicians were using prisoners and Russian Poles and some Poles who were in confinement, and also some Jews also in that kind of trial. So what we're calling this, without going into very many of them, is we are talking about abuse of research participants. In fact, the most interesting one again came around 47, when the Japanese were using, this time American prisoners, they are called the Japanese vivisection experiment, where you have people in class, you're teaching students, and you have a live person, you shoot the heart and take out the heart, try to operate, and the man is alive, watching, and students are being treated to study the heart and how somebody dies.
To see the heart as you die.
As you die. You know, those are some of the things that I can talk about to say made it necessary for the human race to begin to ask themselves, how do we protect research participants? And that was the beginning of the development of ethics.
So how did that evolve over years? Because now, obviously, you're looking at this, I mean, in my mind, catastrophe when it came to how the human being was treated when it came to medical science, research and testing, right? Yeah. How did then the development of an ethical code for this practice then begin?
Yes, let's look at the earliest. The earliest is called the Nuremberg Code, the Nuremberg Code of 1947. And this came out of the American jury itself holding trials of the 23 physicians who had participated in these atrocious experiments. And then 12 juries went to sit in Nuremberg, in Germany, and came up with the first code in ethics of research, which is called the Nuremberg Code. Now, basically, it had some 10 rules, among which was issue of the consent of the participant, and informed consent. Do I know what's going to happen to my body? That was the first ethical rule that came in from Nuremberg. The issue of do I understand? Issue of understanding. The third issue was on confidentiality. How confidential are my results? There are issues of safety. How safe is what I'm going to? And then there were issues of, do I understand? Mentally, am I of age to be able to understand? Is there stigmatization? Are we stigmatized? You saw when COVID came around here, there were issues like, am I going to infect somebody? So people started running away from others and all that kind of things. So these are issues that you are now required. The Nuremberg Code addressed some of these issues, and in particular, the purpose of the research. There's something that was dealt with the purpose of research. Is it based on science? Or is it like, in the Nazi trials, the Nazi experiments, people were being watched to die, for example, instead of treating the malaria, when malarial parasite was identified, you were left to see how long does it take for the virus to kill you. I mean, what kind of experiment is that? Or how high would you be taken to lose oxygen so that we say you can die when you reach
beyond
this level. Now, those was experiments which had no scientific value, and therefore the first code dealt with them. The second code that is also famously quoted is the Helsinki Declaration. This was done by the World Medical Association to be able to and the most important thing about the Helsinki Declaration was about the what's called peer review. It is the Helsinki Declaration that created what we call the research ethics committees to be able to look at elements. It came up with something called the peer review. What you want to study must be reduced to some kind of a proposal or a protocol that then other scientists and other ethicists are able to go through it and then be able to say, yes, this research is authorized to take place. So that was a kind of regulation. So we can say the importance of the Helsinki Declaration was to introduce peer review and research ethics committees to be able to look to carry out the review. Now, these then was an important step. The third one I want to, just before you come in, much as the Tuskegee scandal was the first one, because of the delay in discovering it or unearthing the problems in 1966 and sponsoring a task force with the American government called that produced in what is called the Belmont Report. The Belmont Report is another ethical code that is so cited in ethics because it is what introduced the issue of human dignity, what you can call fair subject selection. Are we using children or are we using adults? Are we using mentally retarded people and all those kind of things? So that is the evolution of ethics and the review process.
So it was not, I mean, because one would think, like you said, these atrocious things were happening. One would think that as then there was a sitting at Nuremberg and then Helsinki later, the assumption, and maybe a naive one, would then be that it called for an end to all trials on the human body. But what we're saying now is that it was then possible for them to look closer and say, all right, it's possible to still do trials on the human body, however, maintain the dignity of a human being. Is that what now we're looking at?
Actually, the word that is used, you're quite right. The word that is used is called equipoise. Equipoise means that, there's a balance. You cannot stop research. You cannot stop the wheel of science because it leads to discoveries that are beneficial to us. But in this process, you should also not abuse the rights of the human being. So all the time, and I can tell you, despite the existence of these codes that are so many now, the latest we have that is supposed to have a universal application is called the UNESCO Declaration of Bioethics, 2005. So despite the promulgation of all these codes, unethical research still goes on. It goes on. So it's just like, despite the existence of law, people continue to commit crimes and to do wrong things. But the regulation must be there to be able to deal with these menaces, or we call them mischiefs. As late as in our own country, you may have had. You may have had something called Pal Omega, which is supposed to have been curing AIDS. You must have heard of somebody called Dr. Stone with something called polyatomic apheresis and all those kind of things. So these scandals continue. We ourselves, in fact, in KEMRI, we are said to have carried a research that produced Cameron, which was supposed to have been a treatment for HIV, and which was a scam. So
how do those things happen?
It's human nature.
Go ahead. Let loopholes? Is it loopholes in the system that people know how to circumvent them, or is it maybe even the ethics committee just sitting and looking, and they don't consider some things? Some things later emerge that we may have overlooked this, or we may have not have taken this into consideration, this particular aspect of ethics?
Well, very good question. Let me say, you can never anticipate what's going to happen. Like today, or a few months ago, we were comfortable saying, okay, COVID is gone. Now we are getting to hear COVID is back. Yeah. So people continue to try to find out what is it about what's going to happen. And the law, or even the ethical codes, can never anticipate what is going to happen. Let me give you an interesting example that posed ethical problems for us. Is you have say 50 people brought in with COVID. There's only one support machine in the hospital. Who do you put in there? Right. Ethical issue. Right. Who do you do? Is it age? Is it class?
Comorbidity?
Is it the comorbidity? Or what is it? So ethical challenges will still exist, so that we, even in ethics committees, we cannot overcome them, or we cannot anticipate what they're going to be. And then there are issues of money. There are issues of profit. And this profit drives a lot of researchers. And so you want to look for an easy subject. If in America people are so much aware of their rights, come to Kenya, come to Turkana, and get somebody who wants salt only. Give me salt, then I will take I'll take part. So these are things we look out for: the protection of that person who is vulnerable. And in the third world, I say Kenya included, in the third world, the greatest challenges we are having are, first of all, illiteracy.
Yeah.
How do you ensure that people actually understand?
That second bit, they understand, so they give you consent.
Yes. So you are talking about informed consent, and you say, okay, somebody has signed here, but does he really understand? Illiteracy is a big problem in the third world for us, and we tend to look out for it and say, how much do we protect that man from Lake Victoria, that fisherman who does not speak any language? The second one is, of course, what we call just technical language.
Ambrose.
Yes, technical language is our next problem. That in science and in research ethics, there's a lot of technical language. I've just used the word placebo. Who knows placebo?
Yeah.
You put it there. A big challenge again that we try to look out for from an ethics committee. Then there's just simple poverty, where you induce a person 20 shillings will make somebody participate. That will not happen in the US. So we look out for that, what we call vulnerability brought about by poverty. And then, of course, technical language is a big problem, illiteracy, and cultural practices.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Ambrose Rachier talking about bioethics, and especially when you talk about research in the Kenyan context, biomedical research. Ambrose, we've talked about human trials all the time. Who covers the animals, primates, rodents, when they're used in trials?
Yeah, we have animal care unit, and each and every research ethics committee always wants clearance from the animal care unit before they approve research, even involving rats, which are very much used, and apes as the closest primates to the human being. So they are taken care of, and whenever a proposal comes before me for consideration, in addition, because at times, when particularly you're talking about trial of drugs, you will find they are tried first on drugs. Some of them try them on rabbits, and then they come to apes. So we look at their own protection, their own use, including their disposal once they have been used. So we pay attention to animals also. Right.
I'm asking that because there are two angles. There's, of course, those who look at animal rights, and the other thing, the exposure of the animals under trial to humans. You, of course, know that whole global conspiracy theory about the origin of COVID-19 and the proximity of a certain lab to the Chinese city. So how do you cover that?
Well, what we do is that if you're sitting, our main study will be on the human participant, but we do have stages of trial. Before you try it on the human being, you are trying it on animals, and therefore we entrust the animal care unit to be able to look at. We don't go in to look at the animal rights ourselves, but we expect a clearance from the animal care unit before we give approval on our side. So it's kind of giving it to another specialized body rather than we ourselves trying to decide on animal rights. So all we do is to ensure that have we got the animal care unit approval before we look at it now from the human protection point of view. Right.
Most, whether it's a drug that you're using later, if it's a form of treatment, there's the rider that they will put there talking about that they have upheld all ethical codes when going through this.
Yes.
Is that purely for a point of information, or is it really then to rubber stamp that they've actually done this? If what you're saying then is the case, that you will not give clearance to go ahead if they've not followed. So then the assumption is that it's been followed and that all relevant bodies have done that. So then what purpose does the rubber stamp on the good or on the service then provide thereafter?
Actually, that rubber stamp comes from the manufacturer. And before the manufacturer reaches that level, there's another body that goes through that is called the Pharmacy and Poisons Board. So when you're dealing with issues of efficacy, you'll always see a number of research talking about studying efficacy and the immunogenicity of some substance or that kind of thing. We look at how it is being conducted, but the tests on how efficacious it is and how dangerous it is goes then to the Pharmacy and Poisons Board. And it is the Pharmacy and Poisons Board which, being satisfied, and you will see stage trial, this is stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, they will always be giving you different stages until it is released in the market. And in the market, they then have to certify that they have gone through all that. So that's the work again of the Pharmacy and Poisons Board. Yeah. So we all work together when there's a drug trial.
So yes. Now, so there's this interaction with the drug companies and the research institutions and organizations. Drug manufacturer has a drug which they say does A, B, C, D. Okay? At what point then do the researchers interact with the drug company? How do they interact so that they can determine the very word you use, the efficacy? Okay?
Yes. Now that's how. Okay, they're interesting, very interesting bodies. I'll introduce a fourth one, which is called the Data Protection and Monitoring Board. That is the one that is really is supposed to be an oversight over the Pharmacy and Poisons Board. Actually, normally appointed by the manufacturer in the interest of the manufacturers, because you see, when the research is going on and the drugs are being tried on human participants. We, as an ethics committee, have a rule that you must report serious adverse events, or some of them, sometimes we call it SUSARs, that is serious, unexpected, serious and adverse events. In other words, people are reacting as they take the drug. You know, if you're trying an HIV and AIDS drug, you are actually using people who living with HIV.
Yes.
We'll be looking at their confidentiality even at the time that they're using these things. Number two, their reaction to the drug. But we expect the researcher, the person we call the principal investigator, in short we call them PIs. We expect them to be able to report to us as the drug trial goes on the effects. If there are any deaths, they're supposed to be reported. If there is a reaction like Stephen Johnson's reaction to any kind of drug, we see, is this drug related or not drug related? So we can stop, or we can say, call in the Data Safety and Monitoring Board to see, is this thing dangerous to the participants? So we have the Pharmacy and Poisons Board, which will be looking at the efficacy. The Data Safety and Monitoring Board, appointed by the drug company, then looks at this safety issue. I want us to really understand the nexus, because once the drug goes out, it's a dangerous thing. It will boomerang on the manufacturer. The people will be saying this thing is no good.
Yep.
The consumers. So
Bad PR on the manufacturer, which could affect
they'll
their
stop
business.
buying it, and they say this thing does not work.
Yep.
Or this thing is dangerous to us. So it is important. It is the interest of the drug companies, Wellcome Trust and all these other people, that they themselves must ensure that the drug, A, is efficacious, 2, it is safe. So we are all together. We ourselves deal with it at a very early age, because at early stage, when the research is going on, we get reports. Are people dying? Are people reacting? And are they reacting? And then in the end, we look at a sample. You know, we'll be interested in a sample that, okay, sample size, how many people benefited or how many people suffered or all kind of thing. So it's a whole process that starts from our looking at how it will be done, and when it is going on, we do monitoring and evaluation to be able to see how dangerous is it, how useful is it. And then at that stage, we also engage the Pharmacy and Poisons Board to be able to report to us on the efficacy and, as I say, efficacy and the immunogenicity of any given drug. And then once we're now coming to an end, hoping that it's going to be released, the Data Safety and Monitoring Board must come in and it's out of our hands.
Now it moves to the air.
It goes
For
and
licensing.
and yes, and it goes into the
the
market.
You know, when people talk of research, one hears of talk of this particular trial is a phase 1,
Yes,
2, 3, 4. What determines these phases?
those phases start with the animal. Okay.
Yes.
Once you see the animal, our constitutional composition, where they look at the animals which are nearest to the human being. So they would start with the rat. Okay.
So we are saying that we have similarities with rats.
Yes, we have a lot of similarities with rats, genetically. In fact, we even have similarities with bananas. You might find that yeah, he's some lawyer talking some medicine.
Okay.
Yeah, so we normally start with mice. Mice is very, very popular start, and then we see how they react to something. And you see, research has become so interesting that you will infect the rat. You infect the rat with what you call Plasmodium falciparum. You infect them and say, now you give them malaria, and then you want to try malaria drug and see, is it working on the rat? When it works on the rat, then you move ahead. You go to phase this, phase that. Then now you try it on
humans.
On humans. Then you start maybe with a small sample. Then you go.
Do you do the same?
Pardon?
Do you infect the human with malaria?
Yes, we have something called CHIMS, Challenge Model Studies, at the moment, which comes from the fact that sometimes you will never be able to raise a sufficient number of participants. So you create participants by infecting them. And the main criteria is reversibility. Right. Is it reversible? Can you reverse it? Okay. I mean, recently we went to look into, although it hasn't been approved yet, we went to look at a study on Shigella virus in Kilifi, where we are trying to, it's virus that causes diarrhea. So we want to infect you with that, but put you in a room where you can go to the toilet very, very quickly. You are admitted for 9 days, but you are actually a very healthy person. But we infect you with that so that we can study the behavior of the...
I'm glad you brought that up, because the question then is the process that you use to make the participants understand.
Yes.
Not just the possible harm, but there's also the benefit.
The benefit, yes.
Because beneficence is one of the pillars of research ethics.
Indeed.
Yes. So what are the guarantees that you put in place that will ensure that these participants actually understand? And in case like this, that their families also understand exactly what it is that they're going into.
Thank you. Very, very, very brilliant, very brilliant question. This study is yet to come to us, but we went just to see how they want to do it. Now, the interesting question that you raise is that while we are supposed to be protecting the participants from harm, is indeed a contradiction.
We're introducing harm.
In terms that we are introducing harm. You will understand that it's a justification for it.
Yes.
And the review, our review kind of threshold is higher. We'll try to see how do we, first of all, this person must understand. Must really understand the harm. But you see, we are doing this study for the benefit of the larger community who are going to gain from the research that we are able to treat this, yet we are not able to, instead of allowing it to just spread, we are not able to raise sufficient number of participants. There are countries that have accepted this. In Africa, I think out of the 54 or so countries in Africa, 32 have already accepted the use of what we call human challenge models, where we actually make you sick to be able to study you. It's going on in our country. I was asked sometime a few years ago to talk about it in in India, and they became very wild. They actually almost threw us out of the hall. I remember going with my friend Dr. Bernard Ogutu, who does malaria, and we had approved a challenge study, a multi-center study here, done in Kilifi and Gabon, and I don't know which other country. And one of our Kenyan leading researchers in malaria, Bernard Ogutu, we authorized him to do this kind of study. And so we were asked to be able to, the Indian government was interested, the medical association was interested in saying, Kenya is doing this, can we go? So we went there, but I can tell you it was disastrous because it's a very difficult concept to understand.
Sure.
But the thing that concerns me even more, beyond just understanding, there's, again, the beneficence, there's always the element of compensation in payment. How do you equate what you think is an equitable compensation and what do you use to consider when this is inducement?
Very good. We look at, I think, the issues of status. Like the one we're just dealing with, for example. If you have people, say, around, an area where you want to carry out research, what kind of people are they and what kind of income do they have? As I say, you may need to, this isn't a study that you do at home or people come in casually. You must admit these people to be able to control, what do you call it, a control study. You must get these people in some place and be able to monitor them all the time, how they are reacting. So let's deal with the first issue. The first issue will be the issue of making them understand.
Yes.
Tell them this is a dangerous thing. Do you want to take the risk? Your interesting question is, will the acceptance of the risk be based on inducement, income, or will it be based on compensation?
Yes, and will the compensation be commensurate with the benefits that the people who are conducting that research derive from that research? And how do you balance it again with the two issues I've raised?
That is the tricky part of it, and thank you for really bringing it out. That is the crux of the matter. Like the one we're talking about, unfortunately, we are yet to look into all those issues. But the one that we had approved, the one on malaria, we first must be satisfied that you'll be able to, when it's becoming dangerous, you'll be able to reverse it. You'll be able to treat the malaria. That's number one. So we'll tell the participant will be told that, yes, we are going to infect you with the malarial parasite, but we have this drug that can clear it within a day or so. So we looked at the nature of the risk. Then, why is this person accepting? Now, we always look against inducement, that people should not be induced to participate in research. Therefore, we will not be looking at the inducement part of it, but we'll be saying, okay, you want to be a volunteer, we're going to have you locked up for about 9 days in these facilities. And if you look at the proposed facilities, they're usually very sumptuous looking, which very comfortable for the person. You must explain to the family, just as you say, you must explain to the family where the person is going to. What are they going to do? And it must be something that is not stigmatized so that people will avoid him when they go back. We look at that. Then we say, is he a school teacher? Is he somebody who is missing his job? Is he somebody who is employed somewhere? Then we arrive at a compensation that is commensurate with the risk and also with the time that they take. So this is the work of the ethics committee to look at.
And the benefit that is going to be derived by the
benefit,
researcher.
sometimes we do research not for the benefit of the individual. We say it's the benefit of the community or of a class of persons. Let's take children. If we want to do pediatric research, we want to do research so that we can be able to treat the general menace to children. So that particular child might not be able to gain, but in that case, we don't infect those children. The condition already exists, and we ask the parent to give us consent so that the research is carried out, because there's a particular disease that is really aiming at clearing children in a certain area of Kenya. So we go and research it. So it is important, not just for that child, but for what you call children, because of children,
The community.
right? The community.
At what point do you stop research when it's ongoing?
When we see that it is, those reports that we get are showing us that something is wrong. So we just do, we can just write to stop it. Or something unethical is happening. Let's give you an example of a research that we stopped somewhere in near Miwani there, also I think it was somewhere just near Kisumu. This was a study of involving the use of animals, and these were cows. So these cows were being purchased from the community and being injected with something that we thought was very, very dangerous. And when the research was over, the researchers were selling these animals back to the community.
Eh.
So we said, stop it. And we just wrote, and it stopped. Luckily, it was a whistleblower. Sometimes when the researchers themselves disagree, you get some information that you may never have gotten. Yeah, so we got this thing from just another whistleblower, said that there's something we're doing here which is not right. So those are examples where we can stop a whole study that we had already approved. And it depends on the reports that we are getting. At times also we do what we call spot checks because we don't have facilities ourselves or capacity for monitoring. But normally we decide to visit, say, a research center in Migori, for example. We just appear and say, look, we are here.
Making sure.
Yes, make sure. So I'm able to study where the consent forms, bring them around, so I look at them and say, did these people consent? And you find some of them, there was no consent.
Wow.
Or people thumbprinted, or you find the participant is carrying the research, the consent form upside down, telling you that they don't read.
They can't read.
So you can say, how did they sign?
They didn't understand.
So those are some of the monitoring things that we normally do to protect, as I say, the aim is to protect the research participant, human research participant.
We thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you.
You have shared a lot of information, and we'll invite you again.
Thank you.
We still need to understand a lot more.
I will be able to come.
Yes.
I'll be able to come, and it was my pleasure to come in and talk. I hope I made a bit of sense.
A lot of sense.
Thank you.
Ambrose Rachier is the chairman of the Institutional Scientific and Ethics Review Committee of the Kenya Medical Research Institute. We've been talking about the ethics around medical research, and especially those being conducted in the country. He chairs that committee that authorizes those research and trials.